Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Adopting Enterprise CI/CD, More Speed, Accuracy and Releases. I'm Sarah Taylor, and before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. Today's webinar will last approximately 40 minutes with time at the end for questions. You'll have the opportunity to submit questions to today's presenters by typing them into the questions pane of the control panel. The control panel is situated on the right-hand side of your screen. You can send these questions in at any time. We will collect your questions and address these during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. A reminder that a recording of this webinar will follow within 24 hours. I'm delighted to introduce you to today's presenters who will tell you a bit more about themselves shortly. First, we have Simon Evans, Senior VP of Enterprise, Kenny Small, VP of SAP and Enterprise, and Daniel Gita, VP AI Delivery. So over to you, Simon.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Welcome everyone to today's session. As Sarah mentioned, I'm SVP of Enterprise. What that means in Qualitas terms is we have a dedicated practice for enterprise apps, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. From my own background, I have 20 plus years experience in the enterprise space, primarily around SAP, but also across some of the other core applications and obviously numerous applications that we've integrated over the years. Kenny.
Thank you, Simon. My name is Kenny Small. I work with Simon in the enterprise practice, looking over the US side of things. My background, I've been with Qualitas and Simon actually for 7 years now, working in this industry, in this area. And previously I started off with an SAP engagement at a large pharmaceutical organization, and decided to take the step into consultancy and not look back. And my background personally is SAP, but have since moved on to more architecture of enterprise landscapes. Dan, do you want to give an intro?
So my name is Daniel Gita. I've worked in software development and quality for around about 12 years now on both sides of the fence, building applications and ensuring quality on them. Background is more to do with automation performance across landscapes, not just in the enterprise space but in others. But these days my main focus is artificial intelligence, both how do you assert quality on artificial intelligence and how do you use artificial intelligence to improve quality elsewhere.
Great, thanks Dan. So as I mentioned a few seconds ago, within Qualitas we have a dedicated practice focused on enterprise. What this means is we have teams of specialists that focus in on areas such as SAP, Oracle, and some of the other items that you see on the screen. The reason we have specialisms is because we carry slightly different skill sets, primarily around business process expertise. Our testers go through the same certifications on the platforms as implementation consultants, and really that allows us to really get under the skin of the various implementations, understanding what the business impact is, which then enables us to really sort of target in on the what to test and how best to test it. And we'll cover some of those items shortly. So if we move on and look at today's session, Kenny, do you want to just take us through what the key takeaways we want for everyone today to be?
Yeah, of course. What we want to do today is take you through some key challenges that we see across the enterprise landscape when it comes to CI/CD and debunk some myths, if you like, with a detailed approach. What we want to get out and show you is that we can achieve the following: flexible weekly releases. We don't have to do big quarterly deployments, so on and so forth, that we see with these large-scale enterprise projects. We can do flexible weekly releases. We can run a full test pack overnight, specifically for the change that's been applied, and there's some intelligent tooling and tool sets that we can use to enhance that. We can achieve zero production incidents, and we have done. It is possible, and this approach and method enables that. And when we do enterprise, one thing that we need to look at is say, well, can we test beyond the boundaries of your enterprise? And you can do. The enterprise applications sit in the middle often of a plethora of other applications that run, upstream and downstream. And we can achieve instant recovery of system errors and failures. We can reduce the cost and the risk and the time of a failure in production, which we're hoping not to achieve, but these things happen. And we can, by using smaller releases, we can deploy straight away. What you need to consider to enable all of this is, and these are the common misconceptions that we often see. Automation is just one piece of the puzzle. Automation is important, but automation focuses on the continuous integration. So automation can run every time a change is made. That's correct. But what we need to focus on is the other elements. So what about the continuous deployment side of things? And these are the aspects that we blend together to make the framework to ensure that we can deliver CI/CD for an enterprise landscape. Input is equally important to output. Rubbish in, rubbish out. Everyone's heard about that. We all know about it. We need to also make sure the input's correct. And again, there's some intelligent tool sets and approaches that we're going to take you through. And ultimately, treat enterprise the same as other areas. If you look at an enterprise landscape, we already do CI/CD well known on front end, like front-end web development, for example, and also it's quite common on the middleware. Where it's not common is the enterprise applications, which means enterprise is behind the curve. So we need to speed that up and take us into the modern world. And what we find is testing is often considered by many the number one barrier to speed and agility, and there's a number of reasons, Simon.
Yeah, so when I'm speaking with customers and we look at some of their challenges, the one thing that's constantly coming up is the speed of testing. Testing being a blocker, dealing with backlogs, and certainly around the enterprise space, just the scale and complexity of environments seems to be still getting in the way of testing. And unfortunately, even though years and years have passed, we still seem to be coming up against the same challenges. There's numerous studies out there. World Quality Report is a common one that people look into, and really that's identifying a number of key things. So people are saying 80% around the enterprise testing space still doing manual testing. So whilst there is automation in there, people aren't capitalizing on automation, and it's just focused around regression most of the time. We know it's a complex environment, typically 50 plus other applications integrating. Certainly we see a lot more than that, instead of 100, 200s in some instances. And the test of cost, because everything's still manual, the cost of testing is still high, and people are under more cost pressure these days. So somehow we've got to look at ways in which we can accelerate, drive that velocity through with testing, get things running smoothly and automated, not just around execution, other areas as well, and really drive that cost down. We should be able to easily double what we're doing today, utilizing the same cost base.
And what we've seen is across multiple large S4 engagements, this happens. We see tester as viewed as this barrier, and we've seen on the flagship S4 engagements, we've done 3 this year, automation has not been included during the scaled agile framework at all. So during the cycles, there is no automation now. As Simon pointed out, for regression, there is, but we need to start thinking about this continuous deployment as part of the cycle in the framework, and not just as regression.
Yeah, and I think what you're seeing, Ken, is there's still thousands and thousands of test cases being done, but not necessarily the clarity of exactly what's being tested and why. Is that safe to say?
Yeah. It's a view of let's test everything because of the fear of what we've got on the screen now of this happening. People want to test everything, and they want human eyes and hands on it. They want the process owners and the business users to go through and validate.
Yeah. We want to be testing. Testing is about quality, and if quality goes wrong, then things very quickly come back round to point at the test team, and for very good reason. We know that the cost of business downtime is huge. It's estimated that's typically around $1 million per hour in large organizations. In today's world, any kind of outage is quite often visible to your customers. Even something that was perceived as back office once upon a time still has consequences that impact the front office. And then, the overall cost of failure, there's loads of examples out there. It's not uncommon to see something in the sort of 20, 25 million impact range, but also scaling much, much higher into the sort of 90 plus. And obviously these are the things that we're trying to prevent. And by preventing, what we're talking about is doing things smarter, not just testing more. So when we look at our key goals, Kenny will take us through where we think you should be focused.
So just to lead on from what Simon said, the cost. The cost is huge and the impact of these production incidents is significant. So we do need to focus on value quality. The goal that we would say in an enterprise CI/CD environment and approach should be 0 production incidents, and that takes care of that cost effort, and we can definitely achieve it. And the way we achieve it is we look to have accurate identification of the business impact. So we need to understand in depth what is happening with that change and how is the business being impacted. Therefore, we can make the right decisions and have the right targets to make sure we assess that risk and mitigate it. How we do that, and we'll get into that later in the deck, and we've got a demo from Dan. We look at the AI impact analysis. So we use AI to run through the change, analyze historical test information, and map that change to the test suite. So we can then trigger the test that we know matters and identify where the risk is going to lie. That removes that cost element. Then we look at how do we get faster? We need to accelerate with speed. And again, Simon briefed this when we spoke about 8% of tests still manual, and I've seen it on the recent S4 engagement we've done this year. We can release weekly, not quarterly, and this is one of the key takeaways. We do this through the execution of the targeted tests. This is driven from the impact analysis to tell us what we need to target. So now we know what we need to target. We target those tests, and to do that, we need an automation framework where we automatically trigger the test based on the change. And we look at the test suite's coverage by process area, so then we can really hone in on that business impact on that business area. The third goal that we want to focus on today, right information at the right time. We can do all of this impact analysis and automation, but we still need to make decisions on it. We need to make decisions on the release. So we need to understand what is the impact of this information we've got. We see a failure. What does that mean to us? This is where we need to look at having an intelligent dashboard with deep dive metrics, providing that end-to-end traceability, and crucially, that continuous learning. So we continue to understand the historical information, where the change is, and make the right decisions and feed up to leadership about those right decisions as well to justify them. This is the goal that we don't often see, as a lot of the focus is focused on achieving the 0 production incidents, so that's reducing that cost, achieving the speed, but we really need to understand the quality, what is happening with it. So we're going to take you through today the approach of how we would do this across these 3 elements. But before we do that, we want to frame it up in a real scenario. So we want to introduce a couple of the stakeholders that we often see that have the challenge to really bring it to life of what the challenges with testing are.
So we have our stakeholders on the screen. Obviously, typical people that are involved in changes and deployments, from our IT side through to the business. When we're engaging with customers, typically these are the things that we hear on a regular basis. So can we reduce the backlog? We're not applying changes frequently enough. It's taking too long to deploy things. Testing is really at its maximum limits. So they're under pressure to produce quality and to catch the defects going through. But they're also being asked to do more, but they have no additional time. In fact, time is reducing because the demand around change has increased. And we talked earlier around the cost. So what do? They're kind of boxed into a corner. From a process owner perspective, the onus then is falling onto them to catch the gaps. They're having to get large numbers of people involved. Their teams don't particularly want to be involved in testing. Ultimately, they're doing things that they think should have been delivered elsewhere. However, from that business side, quite often there's that lack of trust. So, they've experienced quality issues, and they quite often are saying, we need to test lots of things. We want to see testing covering lots of things, because they're just afraid that poor quality is going to slip through the net. So on the one hand, you've got the business demanding change and wanting to push things through, and your project managers trying to get things through as quickly as possible. And on the flip side of it, that sort of lack of trust around the quality piece, saying, come on, you've got to really test this thoroughly. And ultimately, it's slowing everything down. So testing is the blocker. So following on from those thinking, people trying to speed up, they're saying, right, how do we do this? And people have talked about automation for years and years, but it's always the first thought. We must automate. But there's a number of challenges with that, Kenny.
Yeah, and this is where I see it, and I get involved typically with customers when we engage and we look at what they're doing, and they've had these challenges that we've gone through, and okay, we want to automate first, and we try and automate. But if you automate everything today, often we pose that challenge to our customers and ask them, will that resolve all of your problems? And most times it's no, it won't, because again, I mentioned it earlier, that's focusing on the continuous integration part only, and it doesn't really look at the other elements. And then what we often see after the mass effort of this, we need to automate, is from a cost perspective, our clients have underestimated the cost to maintain. And then they have to stand up a team to manage the automation pack and make sure there's no outages and so on and so forth. Then from a time perspective, we still don't achieve the speed that we need. The automation packs are still taking greater than 1 day. And, I'm engaged to try and help people identify why, and we'll go through that why in the framework later. And one of the key elements for that time is they still have large volumes of manual tests. So even to get through the test pack, we still have to stand up a major team sizes to get through these tests. And then from a quality perspective, we do a deep dive, we do assessments, and we look into the statistics, and we see that we're testing lots, but we still have the same results. So we ask the question, are we testing the right things? And are we testing correctly? Are we testing how it's meant to be tested? So this is where we can enhance with some AI features and really learn about the data and provide that continuous improvement. And ultimately, we still find each business unit and process area are working independently. So they're selecting the tests independently. So we don't know if we're testing the right things. So a combination of these results across cost, time, quality results in the element of we tried to do automation to resolve these problems and it hasn't. And again, key takeaway, automation is just one piece of the puzzle, a very important piece, but one piece. And it's really, framed up in the example we've got here where a customer automated 9,000 test scripts. 6 months later, we did analysis. The customer still weren't happy. Same problems are occurring. And there's only 8% coverage there. The cost to do this was over $1 million. So the impact is huge when the focus is not in the right areas. So we want to build a framework and an approach where people can learn from it and overcome these challenges. And as I move on, a lot of that time spent about automation is selecting the tool.
It is. And what we're not going to take you through today is this is not about an automation demo. As Kenny said, it's one piece of the puzzle, but it's an area people get really hung up on. And when automation gets talked about, the next thing everyone focuses in on is what tool do we pick? Which of the automation tools out there should we be using? Obviously in the enterprise space, we're quite often guided down going into the commercial tooling because of the coverage that they provide us, and it's the right choice. But the downside of commercial tooling is there's a price tag. So because automation is one piece of the puzzle, the tooling is as well. What we're building here and enabling for customers is tool agnostic. So what we're really saying is it doesn't really matter. From the products that are on the page here, which are kind of the main four that people use in the enterprise space, they all work. They all do the right kind of job. If you've got one of those products right now and you're thinking maybe we need to move to another one, you could do, and there's some benefits. The tools advance at different paces, but you don't need to ultimately. So we can work with your existing tooling to build out the example that we'll shortly go through. And that's the whole purpose of this, really, is to give you the flexibility. So with the focus on automation, what we typically find when we go into organizations that have automated is they go through a period where they're getting some benefit from automation, but ultimately 12 months later, they're in a very similar position. Testing is still taking too long. Quite often the automation packs take a long time to set up. They need a large group of people to manage and maintain. It's not unusual to have 5, 10, 12 people managing the automation, which is crazy in my view. It's not delivering the benefits that they expected. And even the execution itself can take long periods of time. So to stand up the tests, execute, explore the results, days go past, which is not particularly helpful. Your test team are still under pressure. They still don't have time to test everything. And with cloud solutions coming on board, not only are they testing the business changes and the integrations, but those cloud changes that are coming through quarterly or however the vendor is sending them through is requiring a lot of testing and causing conflict. And of course, you're not in control of exactly when those changes come in either. You still therefore got that lack of trust from the business side in terms of what should be tested and how it gets done. And those that are getting involved obviously are getting more and more frustrated as they're having to direct, guide, or even do the manual test execution themselves rather than getting on with the day job. So surely there's a better way to do this.
And we think there is. And it'll be interesting just on those challenges at the end if we get some questions and either have you seen it before, are you seeing it now, and have a good discussion about it, because we think you probably are seeing those challenges and there's a better way to do it. And we've broken it down into 3 straightforward steps, looking at velocity, which is about increasing the speed, increasing the accuracy, increasing the quality of your approach. The first step is impact analysis. This is all about what do we test? As that change comes in from your change analyzer, from your branch, whatever it may be, how do we understand what do we need to test? And stop working in silos, align a common practice of identifying this. And Dan will take us through a demo of that, and it's really fascinating what the power of AI can do. Then we need to send the output to automation frameworks. We need to have the automation framework automatically select and execute the targeted test. We want to recommend the test for the gaps, and we want to understand, again, all about the data coming in. Where is the coverage? Are we testing the right thing? And make sure we get that covered in the automation framework. Finally, we send that output of what passed, what failed, where were the errors, what were the errors, to the intelligent reporting. This is where we look at that continuous improvement. So not only can we make a decision on the immediate release, we can also make decisions over time, gather data, all this intelligent information coming through, use it to continuously improve and make decisions. And it doesn't matter what tool sets we do this with. We can do this across the board. So that's the 3 easy steps that we think, and we say easy, we understand there's a lot of difficulty and practicality, but we try and simplify it as best we can.
So let's start getting into the meat and get on to actually showing you some of this stuff. So we'll couch this around a customer example where one of our customers really set us a challenge, which was, they want to move from large quarterly releases to regular weekly releases. They want to increase the amount of change they're doing overall, but in obviously smaller drops. So they wanted to have a process which says they can make changes. This is across their SAP platform. So as the transports go through, they can analyze, do that impact analysis, select the tests that need to be executed, most of them automated, so that gets triggered and very, very quickly have those run, get the results, and for the process owners and stakeholders to make the informed decision as to whether they're good to promote to production or not. So we have a couple of little challenges in there. One, they've got lots and lots of manual tests, and they wanted to reduce it by 30%. In reality, once we went through that process, we've actually done it by over 60%. I think it's about 64% reduction in those manual test cases. They wanted to significantly reduce the time it was taking to do all the execution. That was at 32 days, and it's now down at 4 hours. So it's a huge shift in terms of accelerating. And then using that information, building the confidence within the team so they can start to really drive that weekly release schedule, put more and more change in that, in those drops, and have the quality filtering through. So using that as an example, we'll get into how we've achieved that.
So what you see on the screen here is your classic CI/CD pipeline. And what we've highlighted is where testing comes in terms of this framework. So you can see the three steps above: impact analysis, automation framework, and intelligent reporting. As you make your change, and let's look at SAP Solution Manager as an example, and any enterprise application set can be used, but let's focus on this. Your business process change analyzer, which is a standard feature of Solution Manager, will tell you what objects have changed, where and where. That output and report can then be sent on into QualiSense or any AI tool to identify what is the risk of that change and where do we need to focus the testing. So what needs to be tested and in what priority order, and also when. All of that can be sent and piped into Jenkins. This will then trigger that automation suite, run all of those tests in the order they need to be done with the risk profiles so we can accurately execute the change and therefore move quicker, move faster, move with more accuracy. Then we send our results into QualiView. Again, an AI-supported dashboard, any supported dashboard will work. We're going to show you QualiView today. That dashboard is going to show you why do you need to care and where do you need to care. So we focus on those stakeholders who feel like they're wasting time, wasting energy. No longer is that the case. They'll be told exactly where they need to look in a very seamless, integrated business view. Dan's going to start off now, and we'll hand over to him to show you the power of this tool and how it works, and take you through the demo of this process to really show you the meat and bones of this approach. Again, focus on the 3 steps. As the change is made, we do impact analysis, send that information to the automation framework to execute, and follow up with intelligent reporting. Dan, over to you to show the value of all of this.
All right, thanks very much, Kenny. So I hope that one of the things that's coming through as a theme here is that we are obviously always trying to go faster with software. It's always I want to release yearly, I want it quarterly, I want it monthly, I want it weekly, I want it nightly, I want it hourly. And that's great, right? It means that our customers are always getting the benefit of the most up-to-date version of the software. But to do that, you get to a point where you can't just test faster. You can't just test harder. You also need to start to think about testing smarter. Going back to that example that Simon gave, an organization turned around and automated 9,000 test cases. They were running lightning fast, but they were still only covering 8% of the application. There's 2 things we really need to do to make sure we don't fall into the same trap. The first of them is, what do our test packs actually do? Where do we focus our testing? What are we covering? And the second of them is, what order do we need to test in? And I'm going to talk you through how AI helps us with both of these things. So the first one is what we call the test consolidation case. And in this case, it's what we call the test consolidation case. And in this case, what you're trying to understand is, I need to test across the entire breadth of my application, but I don't want to over-test in any one area. You think about test packs. Over time, they inevitably pick up dead weight, for want of a better term. You know, new testers come in, they don't realize that maybe there was already some test collateral that covered this functionality, or maybe we change the way we do testing. We alter things to maybe align with the test pyramid or a different automation style, but we don't necessarily get around to removing the old tests. We always tell ourselves that once everything's smooth and running with the new way of doing it, we'll put the old ones into deprecation mode and we'll never run them again. Quite often that doesn't happen. Or maybe we're going between test cycles or test phases and our timeline's a little bit compressed and we just copy the test pack rather than reuse the old one in a new permutation. Sometimes we're copy-pasting test steps rather than just data driving a template scenario. There's a number of different ways test packs can creep in their scope, but the end result is the same. You end up with very, very large, heavy test packs that aren't necessarily entirely useful throughout their entirety. And what we really want to do is cut it down. If we know that testing everything, even with automation, is still going to take us longer than we have to simplify what we test. And within Qualitest, we have a tool called QualiSense. QualiSense is our artificial intelligence platform, and we use QualiSense to optimize testing processes. And I'm going to show you how we do the first of these challenges, consolidating tests. Okay, so what you're looking at here is QualiSense. Now, QualiSense is an application that we integrate into your pipelines, much the same way you plug Jenkins into your pipelines, much the same way you plug version control systems into your pipelines. It's just another piece of the process. And what you've got here is we've taken some test data. In this case, we've taken a regression test pack. It's a pretty noddy regression test pack. It's for a retail site. And you can see there's some fairly standard use cases. Open the home page, perform some logins, do some registration checks, and so on and so forth. And the kind of data we've taken here is nothing particularly special. It's the same kind of stuff you'd find in general test cases. So we got a little bit of information about test steps, expected results, the actions undertaken, what's the test case, bit of description, the sort of things you find in most manual test cases. Within QualiSense, we have some very, very powerful NLP functionality. NLP is natural language processing. It's the idea that we can get machines that understand what we say and what we write and what we do. And so what I've done here is I've used one of our inbuilt recipes for duplication detection, and it's executed through, and it's populated this table. And what it's actually done is it's taken a look at every single one of our test cases. It's taken the test step and it's analyzed the test steps, the test name and the test description to say, what is this test trying to do? It's getting into the semantics. What is the purpose of this test? And we can see that what it's done is it's put the test in a topic. In other words, it's saying that the purpose of this test is to access the homepage or access the login form or validate the registration. Every single test case in the test pack gets put into its topic. And what this then tells us is all of the test cases that have the same topic, as far as the AI can tell, are doing exactly the same purpose. And what that means is if we take a report on the topic, we can go down it and say, do I want all of these test cases to do this thing? Now, obviously, in this single grid view, that's not too helpful, but if we output that to a presentation tool, something like a QualiView dashboard, we start to see the following. All right, so what we've got here is our test consolidated dashboard. And what's happened here is all of that output information has been put into a single test manager's cockpit view of what is going on with my test pack. And you can see we've got a few aggregate numbers. We know how many clusters of tests there are. These are the same as those topics, right? Each of those topics forms a cluster of tests that do the same purpose. We've got 35 clusters across 100 test cases. And we think we can remove just shy of 80 test cases. And on manual testing, that's a little bit around about the 14-hour marks. But we also see a little bit more information here. We can start to see which clusters are the really big ones, which ones have a lot of testing going on. So we can see the biggest cluster is search for clothing, which in this test pack is covered by 10 test cases. We've got a few medium and smaller clusters down here. And at the very bottom of this, we've got the test packs that have very little focus. Now, there's a couple of useful bits to this. The first of which is we can see where am I spending all of my testing time. So search for clothes takes a huge amount. And in and of itself, that tells us that we need to take a look at that and work out how to slim that down. And I'll show us that in a moment. But it also gives us another useful perspective, we consider the clusters in order of the rank, I can see that, for instance, 10 of my test cases focus on searching for clothes. 5 of them focus on sharing items on social media, but only 3 of them focus on removing from cart and another 3 on cancelling trolley purchases. We can also consider, relatively speaking, is this really where we want to spend our time? When you think about revenue streams and what my application landscape is, do I really want to say I'm spending all of my time searching for clothes and I'm never actually spending it in the shopping cart? Maybe not. But that's a question for test hygiene and where do we focus. But what we can also do is we can take a look at a drill down view of any of our clusters. And now we can take a closer look through them. So let's say we pick a cluster. We'll take cluster number 7. And we can see here that same cluster we saw, it's got quite a lot of tests in it. And we can see that there do appear to be a few different things, search for clothes, search for apparel, and then we've got a few that appear to be direct copy-pastes of each other that can probably go in the bin. And so what we can now do is we can go straight to our test management tool. We can take a look and our test leads can turn around and say, deprecate this test, do run it, don't run it. This is a once in a release, once in a cycle. It's a hygiene task. We're not going to do this every single time we run testing, but it is a very useful backlog task to turn around and say, right, if I can remove the dead weight from my testing, I know that I'm only focusing where I need to focus. And now I can solve the next problem, which is when I know that I've got the test pack to the minimum size, how do I solve the testing challenges in the most order where I'll find the defects as soon as possible? I'm going to take you through how Qualisense can help with that too. So what we've got here is another Qualisense model of a different kind. Now, you recall that pipeline we showed whereby your information will have come from some kind of change analyzer. Maybe it's a combination of BPCA and Solman. Maybe it's something different for your organization. But ultimately what's happened is we've got a report that says due to some transports going through, these tests are now coming into focus. Well, that's great. If we want to be as cautious as possible, we can run every single test. But if it's a big enough change or it's a big enough change note, that doesn't really solve the problem. We're going to end up testing everything across several modules. What we really want to do is say, okay, I understand that these could be affected, but how do I better choose the ones that are likely to have a problem? And we can actually learn from historic data on this. So what we've done is we've taken historic data of where tests and changes have gone in the past. And you can see there's one of these here. This is a fairly standard enterprise test pack. Again, we've got pretty straightforward information, some details about the script, some details about the scenario, roughly where are we focusing, a little bit of information about where do we focus on, and some details about has this come from Solman, has it come from somewhere else, and what are the test steps we're trying to do, as well as the historic data. Have these tests passed and failed in them previously? As I was saying, we've taken a fairly straightforward set of data here, and this is pretty common data for a standard test pack. You've got some information about the script name, the scenarios, roughly what is the test doing, all the way across to details of the steps that we're focusing on, and historically has the test passed or failed. And what we're doing is we take all of this historic data and we learn from it, and we train the AI to understand when these kind of changes come through, these are the tests that pass and fail. And what ultimately happens is we use the same techniques you saw before. We'll make heavy use of things like text analysis to understand what is going on. In this case, rather than that recipe you saw before to duplicate detection, we're more interested in what is the purpose of this test, what are the phrases, what are the key terms that turn up. But where we're really going with this is we want to build predictive models. And what we want to get to is when a new change comes in, can I take that change and looking at it, say, of the test cases that you've said are in focus, I agree, but this is the order that they're actually likely to fail in. And we train a number of different models within Qualisense, and we will choose the one that is most suitable for your organization and your landscape. And we plumb it in as another part of the pipeline. What will happen is those change notes come from, in this case, BPCA and Solman. They get fed to the model. The model takes a look at them and says, right, these are the scenarios in focus. This is the order in which I think they will or will not fail. And the result of that looks a little bit like this. What you're seeing here is a change note has come in, and we've taken the scripts that are isolated as in focus within that change note, and we've put a prioritized list in here to say, this is the order of likelihood of failure. So as a minimum, if you were a manual tester and some of these scripts contained a manual element, you could just go down here, run them in this order, and know that you are finding the most likely problems up front. But we can also do some more aggregate metrics than that. We can say, well, what actual modules have the problem? You've said that it can affect all of these modules, but which are the ones that are likely to have a detrimental effect? What's the likelihood of a high failure? We can also say, well, if I run the high and the medium and I allow for the fact that I can remove some of these tests, how long should that actually take me? How many problems should I actually find in this data source? But most crucially, whilst this serves as a very, very useful tool for a manager to take a look at and say, this is where I need to focus, the same mechanic that we're using here to turn around and say, this is the focus, can also be used to trigger the jobs. So what we're going to see now is the end result, which is actually not manual engineers looking at this, although it's good for reporting and very powerful. It's also the fact that automation can then be called off the back of this to say, you know what, the highest likelihood failure, just go and run it straight away. Driving that continuous integration and that continuous testing of the risky change. So we've gone from the change has been identified. We've consolidated our testing, so we know that we've got the minimum viable pack that covers it. We turn around and say, based on the change that's coming in, this is where the problem's likely to be, and now I know exactly where I need to focus my testing. I'm going to hand back to Kenny now, who's going to take us through what that automation looks like.
Thanks, Dan. Really powerful stuff. Dan took us through two things, and Simon, relates back to what Simon said about the 64% test consolidation. It's about this hygiene and deduping that Dan took us through initially. He then took us through, okay, now we've deduped, so we know what's good. Let's understand the impact analysis of this. Let's start testing with precision, and as he just ended on, sending that information and those statistics through to the automation framework and the automation tool to really drive the results. And you can run this overnight. You can do it manually where you can accept the change and trigger it. But really the key here is having that risk profile sent. And what we're going to show you next is how that automation would work, and you can run it whenever you want, and it's going to show the speed that we can deliver across an entire suite. And this is where it comes in. So we've gone from assessing the change. I'm going to throw it over to Jenkins. And what you're going to see here is the job run. We've got 3 machines running on this, and it's going to go through and present the change that's happening, present the process and the test cases, and then send out an output at the end through to our dashboard. It's running with some real speed here. On to the final test cases, and we're finished. So that's how quick this can happen. And this is what we talk about. It's not just about the automation. There's a lot of work that's gone in before. We ran the automation in a blink of an eye. And now we're going to look into what's going to happen after automation, which is really where we make our decisions. And here's a few slides now on really how you can use the dashboard and the output to really show some powerful stuff and make some really powerful decisions.
Yeah, so, with the dashboard, and Kenny will dip into the dashboard as well, but just wanted to highlight a couple of key things before we went into that. The most important thing for me when you see reports and dashboards, certainly in a testing context, is it's got to be meaningful. Too many times we just look at pure test information. And if I'm a process owner and I want to validate the testing that's being done, I want to very easily be able to drill into my particular area in a nice, easy to use dashboard, come in and have a look at a specific drop, set of transports, the changes that we've put through. I want to see the tests that have been run specifically for my area. and get an instant comfort feeling. Now, if I'm full of trust around the testing, if I've built that confidence, everything looks good, then I can approve and away we go. Or I might want to start drilling in, and certainly if we've got some issues. Now, within the reporting that we like to do, we like to automatically categorize where we've got certain types of failures. Again, just to take some of the guessing game away. If we can identify what the issue is, highlight it to the key people, then they can again drill specifically into the information that they need. So in this particular example, as a process owner, I can come in, I can look at this drop, I can see, my past failed, what we think might be an automation issue versus what is a system issue. So at the top there, we've got 6 potential automation bugs. Obviously, the automation team need to dip in and see what sits behind that. But those system issues, maybe config, data, whatever it happens to be, that's where I want to drill in and have my focus. Once we drill in, again, I want to be able to see a couple of things. I want to be able to see historically, have my test, has this test been passing and suddenly we've got a failure? Is it, have we historically had particular issues? And I want to be able to drill in very simply just to see what's happened, what steps have gone on, what data set has been used, and really get into a point where I can look at screenshots. So it's about, peeling back the layers, nice simple information up front, getting down into the detail, providing that information so that we can triage if we need to. And like I said, if everything looks good and I'm happy with the testing that's being done, I can just look at that high-level stats, and then sign away so we can get that release moved to production. Kenny, back to you.
I'm going to change my screen now and go into a real dashboard and get some real feedback on that. What we're looking at here is a dashboard from a real project based on the information that Dan shot out. So Dan's QualiSense tool sent over the information, the output, to Jenkins, and then we got Jenkins to send out the results into QualiView. This is just one example of a dashboard, and we're going to, there's many different views you can have and do deep dives into. As Simon said, you want to know what your key metrics are. So 128 tests ran, 9 failed, 119 passed. Then we've got success rate. So we have a 93% success rate. 60% of the tests were automated, and 88% of those automated tests passed. So what I really want to know is, well, what failed and what can I do about it? And is it a concern? So as you can see here, I can just quickly drill in, see the tests that have failed. Here's the information that, will make sense to the project manager. The key thing here is the severity. What is the severity of this failure? The fails are low. That means the dashboard has done some analysis based off the information that's been sent out and in the way we will set it up to identify that this issue is a low issue in comparison to the tests that were executed. So what this tells me very quickly as a test manager is, okay, we don't need to focus in on these failed tests. So I can jump back into my dashboard and send this information out to my closure session, and we can have a very metric-based and metric-driven conversation about what decisions do we make in terms of exit and in terms of do we need to investigate further or retest these failures. And this dashboard is flexible. You can jump into many different views that you need to see, but the key is not about necessarily the dashboard and what dashboard it is, but about the information in there and using that information to learn and make critical decisions. And it's all linked together so you can run this process overnight in the morning, come in, your daily status stand up, jump in and have a very quick conversation and make a decision with speed. And that's what you need to do in whatever format you have. And we've got a framework which is interconnected, and that's what we promote. So coming back to the presentation, you want a dashboard that can integrate across major platforms and tool sets. Again, emphasizing one of the points of the tool set is not the key element here. There's many elements that go as inputs to the tool set and outputs that we need to focus on to make sure we can make the decision on continuous deployment into the production environment.
So rather than having the frustrations that we saw earlier, we get a few months later down the line, and what we've managed to do is unblock that whole pipeline. So we're adopting change at a much faster pace. We talk about weekly releases, but with this type of framework in place, we can test daily, we can test ad hoc, really drive that pipeline of change going through. From a testing perspective, we're focusing on the most critical areas. We're managing risk proactively. We're pinpointing the testing that we're doing. And whilst we showed a bit of automation there, we can target in on specific functional tests if we need to dig a bit deeper. Obviously, we're helping drive that business change, which is the whole objective here. And the quality that's coming through is good. We're getting that zero incidents in production. The business is happy, and we're also relieving their workload. So they're not having to get heavily involved in the actual testing that's being done. They're focusing on their job. And really, from our customer example, it's this whole process that enables us to really drive the acceleration. The acceleration benefits they had around the 95% mark, so it's absolutely huge. And the real key bit on that you've heard us say a couple of times is any tool set, test tool set combination that we've seen going through there. The actual example that we gave is on a sort of a rare combination of tools, because that was using UFT, but it was using the lean FT side. So it's a BDD framework in an SAP environment, which doesn't happen very often. So really just to emphasize that point. Kenny, do you want to wrap us up?
So thank you for your time, and I hope the discussion that we had and what we presented has resonated, and you can achieve these takeaways. Just want to recap on what they were. We can achieve flexible weekly releases. The pack can run overnight. We saw the video and the speed of that. This results in zero production incidents, which we want to spread that across the enterprise landscapes and not just the enterprise application that you may have. And a result of this is we can achieve instant recovery of system failures. We can make the change rapidly, and as we saw, it can be an overnight process of the changes committed. We stack those changes up. We then send all the information to the automation tool overnight, and in the morning we come back and we see the results and can make decisions. We've emphasized that automation is one piece of the puzzle. There's inputs and outputs that must be considered to make sure we hit that continuous deployment, not just continuous integration. The input, as we say, is equally important to the output. We need to make sure the test data is clean. We went through the hygiene of that, and then we need to understand the output. The output's great, but what form do we want to view it? Who's viewing it? How do we want to view it? What information do we want to take out? And not just for that release, but for continuous improvement. Ultimately, we should treat enterprise the same as the other areas of an end-to-end landscape, such as your front-end development, and focus on doing smaller releases more often. And it is achievable. It's a mindset change that we need to happen, and we can achieve that through the approach that we've just discussed. Over to Sarah for the Q&A.
Okay, thank you, Kenny, and thank you everyone for your questions. A few have come in, so let's get started. Okay, first question. How would this fit into a typical scaled agile delivery?
Sarah, sorry, you were breaking up for me. I didn't.
Okay, let me go again. Where did I break up from the beginning?
Yeah, maybe it's just me. I didn't hear any of that, yeah.
Okay. 3, 2, 1. Thank you, Kenny, and thank you everyone for your questions. A few have come in, so let's get started. First question. How would this fit into a typical scaled agile delivery?
As we mentioned at the start, it's often what we see in these large deployments is this sort of approach, and the automated nature is focused on as a regression element only. So what we would do is the common term we all hear of shift left, and really bring it into those cycles, and we would use it to guide us through the cycles, and as soon as the development is done and deployed, from cycle 1, we'd run this tool and we'd assess, and we'd we'd identify where we need to test. So really the answer is building it in from the start, cycle one, fitting it in, and as soon as the development is done for each cycle, deploy this framework, and then we can make the decisions early on to focus the manual testers on either repeating tests or focusing on the defects that we need to investigate.
Okay, thanks, Kenny. Next question. What is the biggest challenge to deploying this framework?
I can take this one again. What we've seen as the biggest challenge is fear. When we look at these enterprise applications, they typically run the majority of the business. A lot of information and data is flying through, and it's heavily revenue-based. A lot of the revenue is dependent on these applications. So what we often see is people or project teams want to focus on having eyes on, human hands on, and taking time to, one, test everything, and two, test everything manually. So it's the fear and the trust element of this working, and the more examples we can prove, the more take up I think we'll start to get to change that perception. But yeah, really the fear of it, and I think it's about starting slow, selecting the safe areas, and starting there on an engagement and trying to do that as early as possible.
Yeah, and just to add a bit of flavour to that, I think, just as an example, with one of our customers, they were having issues in production. They were doing lots and lots of testing to try and combat that. We did some analysis using the tools that Dan showed. We analysed thousands of tests, I think 40,000 tests. And what we identified within that is only 4% of those defects were getting identified. So whilst they were doing tons of testing, it wasn't effective. And they were trying to grow the team, and the demand from stakeholders was test more, increase the test team size, cover more stuff. And actually our advice was, don't do that. Let's get targeted. Let's get smart. Let's test with pinpoint accuracy, introduce automation and various other good things. And very quickly we got to a point of 0 incidents in production. And this was, I think, some 18 months ago. And since then they've not had any kind of significant outage, which is a first for them in a very, very long time. So it's about changing that perception and being pinpoint accurate.
Thanks, Simon. Just following on then from that last question, the same person is asking, how long will it take to set this up?
So obviously it depends on the scale of the organisation we're working with. In the customer example that we referred to, it was, well, the actual setup and starting to see the value from it was within 2 to 3 months, and then over a 6-month process. That was when we could really have the analysis to demonstrate all those benefits and for them to start really showcasing it internally. So the process to consolidate is very, very fast. Getting automation embedded, obviously that grows over time and depends how aggressive you want to be. But certainly to start seeing results, 3 months is where we target.
Okay, thanks again. Our time's nearly up, but we have time for one more question. So let's go for this one. Does Qualisense need to use an SAP impact assessment tool to work?
So I'll start with that one. So the short answer is no. We will take the data from wherever we can get it. The more sources of data, the better. In enterprise and SAP scenarios, though, that is the most useful place to start looking, because if you've already got these tools configured within your life cycle to tell you what the changes are coming in, that's great. There are other tools that do it. It doesn't have to be Solman, for instance. There are competing offerings. We're not trying to replace them. We're just trying to use the information that comes from them as a feed. We're not trying to redo the identifying of changes, for instance. We're just trying to say, based on the changes identified, the related tests identified, what order do we now choose to use the testing in? I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, Simon or Kenny.
Well, no, I think you pretty much summed it up. I mean, from that SAP perspective that we showed, using something like BPCA is great. Live Compare or other products that are out there. As Dan said, we're not trying to replace those. Far from it. What we want to do is take that information, enhance it with things like that historical test analysis and service desk information, whatever feeds we can get. Again, to just get pinpoint accurate around the testing. This is about being precise and fast, which means we can then achieve velocity. It's not just let's blindly automate and end up in that original scenario where 12 months later we're not seeing the benefit.
Brilliant. Well, thank you everyone for your questions, and if you have any questions you think of after the webinar, then please feel free to reach out to me, Sarah Taylor, in the post-webinar email, which will follow after this session. For now, our webinar has concluded, and I'd like to close by thanking our presenters, Simon, Kenny and Daniel, for sharing their expertise today. And finally, an extended thanks to our audience for joining us. Until our next webinar, when we look forward to you joining us again, all the best and goodbye.